We're very lucky to have with us live in the studios once again, Arun Gupta. Arun Gupta is co-founder of the Indypendent, INDY Pendant, and the Occupied Wall Street Journal, and former international news editor of the Guardian Weekly. He has visited more than 40 occupations in 27 states while covering the Occupy Wall Street movement nationwide for The Guardian, Al Jazeera, Salon, The Progressive, The Nation, and Truthout. And he is a regular commentator on Democracy Now!, the CBC, and Al Jazeera. Arun, thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us again this morning.
Great to be with you, Mike.
So the corporate media has been covering now for a couple months and is cranking it up about this so-called fiscal cliff that supposedly we're quickly approaching. You've been covering this as well for a while. Can you bring us up to speed on what you see as key issues surrounding that?
Well, I think one of the most interesting things is there was virtually no coverage while the election was going on. And then immediately, the day after the election, the corporate media is like, oh my God, we're facing this fiscal cliff. What are we going to do about it? So if it's so important, why wasn't it a big topic during the elections? And in fact, the New York Times ended up addressing it because it was just so blatant. And they were like, well, neither campaign raised it, so it wasn't an election. It wasn't an election issue. And it's like, really? That's what determines your coverage, whether the campaigns say it's an issue or not? You know, whatever happened to the Fourth Estate, that they're supposed to be out there showing this independence and talking about what really matters to the public. So the fiscal cliff is in many ways, it's real and it's both a fabrication. It was set up by the Budget Control Act in 2011. That's when the Republicans and Obama basically went up to the edge about raising the debt ceiling and raising the specter that the U.S. Might somehow default on its debt. And it puts in place automatic spending cuts and tax increases that are to take place. There was the super committee was set up as part of that, folks may remember, and it was supposed to come up with these recommendations for all these spending cuts. Now, what's driving it is basically this notion that we have to rein in the deficit, that there's this big, scary problem coming down the pipeline in the form of the national debt, that it's ballooning and that it's going to, destroy our economy and eat up all our children and grandchildren's savings. And the whole premise of it is ludicrous. That is simply not true. The U.S. right now is enjoying interest rates of below 1%. If anybody has a savings account, you see it, right? You get virtually nothing for having a savings account these days because the Federal Reserve's policy is what's known as a ZIRP, which is zero interest rate policy. They've kept basically the interest rates virtually as low as they can go. And so when bondholders are buying U.S. Treasury bonds, notes, bills, the rate that they're getting paid is ridiculously low. And so the U.S. has no problem at all managing this debt. Now, one of the interesting things I found, and that I haven't seen anyone mention, any media outlet. Now, suppose both sides just agree, okay, we're going to let all the taxes stay in place. In other words, there'll be no tax increases on anyone, even the super rich. And we're going to rescind all the spending cuts. According to the Congressional Budget Office, if that happened, the economy will grow 4.4% next year and add 2.3 million full-time equivalent jobs. That would be the best economic growth since the 1990s. And really, the way to get out of the problem, if you believe that the national debt is the problem, the two ways to get out of it, which are interrelated, is one, to allow for moderate inflation, and two, economic growth. That's how you get the debt down. That's how the U.S., when it was at about 120% of GDP debt after World War II, That's how it got that debt down. Right now, the U.S. is around about 100%. It's a little less than 100% of GDP. But the other thing to remember of that, about 40% of that debt is held by the U.S. government itself. A lot of that in the Social Security trust funds and other things.
All right. So, what do you see then as a reasonable solution to this?
Well, first of all these talks about having $4 trillion in cuts that need, or raising $4 trillion in revenue, that needs to come off the table, right? That comes from the Simpson-Bowles Commission, which is something that Obama set up back in, I believe it was February of 2010. And that was supposed to come up with recommendations for how to address the deficit. And in fact, what the Simpsons Bowles, and it was for Alan K. Simpson, I believe he was a senator from Wyoming who was notorious for just wanting to slash everything in the federal budget. And, if we know anything, we should be wary of politicians from Wyoming, like Dick Cheney. And then Bowles was Clinton's chief of staff. And this is one of these, the reasonable men of the center. Well, one of the things that they suggested doing was cutting Medicaid, Medicare, and reducing Social Security benefits. Now, what the hell does this have to do with the deficit, particularly Social Security? Social Security is a pay-as-you-go program. Its funding is perfectly fine. It's completely solvent into the 2030s, and at that point, it can still meet about 80% of its projected costs. And if you really and yes, Social Security does need to be fixed. But the way to do it is to lift the payroll tax cap. And then it'll be fine for another century. Medicare is fine for about something like 10 or 11 years, right? And then it can meet 87% of its costs. Again, the way to fix that is actually to push for a single-payer health care plan and to do things like allow for the government to negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies to push the prices down. One of the things that was outlawed by Obamacare. Why we would be allowing for outlawing bulk discount purchasing is beyond me, unless you're looking to protect the pharmaceutical industry's profits. But, I'd argue that's what Obamacare is really about, is protecting the for-profit healthcare industry's profits, which is why they all came on board and supported the plan. So in any case, one of the things the Simpson-Bowles Commission said we needed to do was to reduce the deficit over 10 years by $4 trillion. This is where the $4 trillion comes from. Okay, it's absolutely meaningless. There is no need to do it whatsoever. The debt is manageable at this point. Yes, it will continue to balloon. Yes, healthcare costs are a driver of that, but single payer.
And of course, cuts to the to defense spending or the Pentagon don't even appear to be on the table. I mean, they talk about it a little bit, but
yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that when what it's called as sequestration happens, if it happens at the beginning of the January, the Pentagon will get a cut in its spending as well. I mean, this is actually, I think, especially if you're progressive, this is a little bit of a difficult area. I mean, I'm in favor of, just slash and burning the Pentagon budget as much as possible, along with like the CIA, FBI, Homeland Security, all those budgets. I mean, there's just an incredible amount of waste. But at the same time, these are forms of Keynesianism, right? That they employ military, security, intelligence, surveillance, police, prison apparatus, employs millions and millions of people. So you have to figure out what you're going to do to create jobs beyond this. Of course, I think we could easily do that. There is a need for a lot more educators. There is a need for a lot more healthcare personnel, especially communities, nurses, community doctors, these sort of things. There's certainly huge underfunding in terms of social welfare, social services, in terms of environmental remediation, the parks industry, conservation, many other areas, but it would require a lot of structuring of different types of jobs programs. We should really understand the military security apparatus as a massive jobs program. It's a very inefficient jobs program, but I was crunching the numbers recently, and it's over 10 million people that are employed. And then when you start to add in all the weapons industries and then all the basically the multiplier effect, it's a huge segment of the economy. So yeah, certainly the Pentagon should have its budget cut by 90%. It would still, the Pentagon budget, when you add in all the different things, veterans and NASA and Department of Energy, it amounts to something like $1 trillion. Why do we have such a massive, wasteful, enormous budget like that?
I think the supposed war on terror is one of the feeders of that. Touch on that President Obama, contrary to what the Obama cheerleaders are saying, he pretty much, since his first term, was putting Social Security and Medicare on the chopping block.
Exactly. In January of 2009, this is 5 days before he's inaugurated, he does one of these sit-downs with the Washington Post, with their editors and reporters. And, this is this big meeting where the new president is coming in, and of course the Washington Post has unique access, and they have this 75-minute wide-ranging conversation. And what does the Washington Post take away from this? The headline is Obama pledges entitlement reform. Okay, whenever you see that headline, you should go like running for the bunker. That term, entitlement reform. That means we're coming for your Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. And he said that. And he said, I'm willing to spend political capital. That's like, wait a minute. We're in this economic crisis that's caused by Wall Street. The deficit is going up. The annual deficit is going up dramatically. But why is it going up? It's because of all these bailouts of the banks. It's because of this massive fraudulent subprime mortgage crisis. And it's because so many people are being thrown out of work, so that the tax rolls, the tax revenue is going down. And you're talking about making poor people, making the elderly, making working Americans pay for Wall Street's disaster. That's been his agenda since the beginning. Like I mentioned, he's the one who set up the Simpsons Bowl Commission. Okay, this is in February of 2010. In his State of the Union address that year, he talked about, we need to rein in spending, that government needs to act like a family. It's just like, the next time someone says that, you just be like, no, okay? It's what family do you know that has 8,800 tons of gold reserves, has a space program, and has strategic nuclear missiles, okay, and can print its own currency? I'm sorry, there's no family in the world that can do that, okay? So let's stop this crap about talking like government needs to act like a family, okay? So he is using all this rhetoric from the right, and this is early 2010, okay? Obama has a supermajority in Congress, so why is he legitimizing all this rhetoric from the right? The only logical conclusion, and unfortunately for many liberals who live in a reality-free bubble similar to many Tea Partiers, they don't want to accept the fact that Obama is fundamentally a right-wing president. And if you look at his actual record, everything tells you that he's a right-wing president. He would have been very comfortable in the Republican Party in the 1980s. A lot of his policies are to the right of Ronald Reagan. And he, in fact, came in saying, talking about his admiration for Ronald Reagan. And you can argue, oh, he was trying to play for the center. But the thing is, if you end up legitimizing the right-wing discourse, you're going to give it a much greater power than it has. The right never has this issue. They don't go around legitimizing the liberal discourse. They attack, constantly attack, even if they're on the outs. What have they been doing right now? I mean, they were just handed a thumping defeat. They lost seats in both houses of Congress. And yet they are being absolutely adamant that they're not going to agree to any tax increases whatsoever. But Obama, of course, is bending over backwards. He's already talking about cutting $400 billion from social welfare programs. It's basically the Democrats end up attacking their base, but that's not surprising because they are Wall Street Democrats. What has Obama spent his political capital on? We have seen no prosecutions whatsoever of Wall Street executives in the subprime mortgage crisis. We now have banks that are too bigger to fail. We had essentially the bailout of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which is a huge bailout to the home lending industry. Obama has done everything possible essentially to protect the home mortgage industry and yet give very little relief to working Americans.
So with Obama then pretty much going along with what the Republicans want on this grand deal, then what do people who want to retain Social Security and Medicare do?
Well, I think one of the encouraging things is that you actually see some Congress members who are standing up. Now, whether this is just a bunch of, smoke and mirrors before they knuckle under, remains to be seen. It's been said, and I think it's quite accurate, that never underestimate the spinelessness of a Democrat. They feed from the same corporate trough. They will often talk a good game, but in the end, they support the same right-wing policies that Obama does, and that is not that substantially different than the Republicans. I think, honestly, people need to be in the streets. I'd wish that this was an issue that the Occupy movement would have taken up, because it's going to be even a bigger theft than the bank bailouts of our money. That's the thing. This is our money. Social Security and Medicare are our money. And this is something that, of course, Wall Street absolutely hates. They've been trying to destroy these programs for decades. Remember, just under the last president, Bush, he was going to privatize Social Security. Well, and what did that mean? Well, it's going to send all this money into Wall Street. Essentially, people will buy stocks. It becomes like this giant 401k. And the reality is what that does is it creates all sorts of brokerage fees for Wall Street banks, but not much money for the people investing. And of course, we know how that would have turned out if Bush had been able to get away with it. So, but if Wall Street can't privatize it, it certainly wants to destroy it, because it can't abide the idea that people should have some sort of retirement. I wouldn't call it a secure retirement, because the average Social Security recipient gets only $1,200 a month. But nonetheless, people, if it's a couple, or if they have a little bit of income, or if they have their home paid off, it's something you can survive on, especially if you also have a decent Medicare coverage. But for Wall Street, they want to get rid of the idea. They want to go back to a time where people literally worked to death, because you can pay them less then. If you're so desperate, that you just want to survive day to day, then you can force wages down. This is why we see like that the wages that are paid in this country are some of the lowest they've been in 40, 50 years in terms of what the minimum wage is at these days.
Has been the term entitlements, is that relatively new for labeling of Social Security and Medicare?
That goes back a ways. I know it was used during the Reagan administration. It is also an offensive term, which I think it's good to point out. It's part of the Orwellian nature of this. People are paying that 7.6% tax. If you're self-employed, you're paying a 15.2% tax on your income. This is your money, that the government then invests. And so to say entitlement as if, that you're some sort of like grasping, greedy geezer, just trying to line your pockets with other people's money is, of course, absurd. This is what Wall Street and corporate America does every single day of the week. It's figuring out how to steal the public's money for its own benefit. And, I think entitlement there isn't an accurate term either. We should call it what it is, which is a kleptocracy.
All right, let's move on to a different subject, if we could. You recently just came out with a new article in The Guardian about a supposed anarchist bomb plot that happened in Cleveland. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So on April 30th, 2012, these five men who are affiliated with Occupy Cleveland are arrested in this alleged plot to bomb a highway bridge in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park near Cleveland. And the FBI, they filed this complaint with the courts where they outline the charges and the evidence, and it's all this very dramatic plot of how these five men were going to use plastic explosives, C4 military-grade explosives, to take down this bridge, to strike terror into, the hearts of people in Ohio. And the FBI, bravely working with 23 separate law enforcement personnel, bought down this cell of homegrown terrorists. So I ended up going to Cleveland and talking to friends and the family of the five, and what I found was a very different story. What was really going on is that the FBI had sent in an informant into the Occupy Cleveland movement the previous October, and was basically trying to see what they could stir up. And this informant, who's been outed as Shaquille Azir, a con man with a 20-year criminal record, basically started offering these guys, and everyone there referred to him as boys. Most of them were in their 20s. Two were in their late teens at the time, 19 years old when it started. And he starts buying them meals. He buys one of them a cell phone, starts giving them money, saying that he has work for them. He ends up offering them a place to live, and nearly all of them are basically destitute, homeless. People describe them as having substance abuse issues. A number of them are addicts. A number of them have real emotional, psychological problems. One of them tried to commit suicide a couple of months before the bomb plot happened. He was basically on the edge of a bridge when he was tackled by cops and sent to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation. Once they were arrested, three of them were at one point or another put on suicide watch. So basically what you have is a group of troubled young men. And it's essentially, they're the losers in this economy. right? None of them had any sort of job. For a number of them, the informant, the snitch, is providing them with the first job that they've ever had. He's buying them beer, he's giving them pot, he's giving them the prescription drug Adderall. And this whole time, this whole plot is supposedly unraveling. I've been in communication with some of the defense team, and they gave me transcripts of some of the FBI tapes, which are available. You have to go through this legal system called Pacer to get them, but they gave me some of the transcripts. And really, what it shows is this guy, Azir, was manipulating them the whole time. He's the one who introduced the idea of explosives. He's the one who introduced the idea of bombing this bridge. Then, when to be honest, these guys were dumb. Right. They did sit around eventually at one point talking about what they're going to do with these explosives. But he was telling them, he said, we on the hook for it. That we have to come up with a plan now, basically this kind of veiled threat that they needed to do something with it or they were going to be in big trouble. But, if you get a bunch of poor, desperate people and you're dangling money and housing and plying them with drugs and alcohol, I think you could get them, it would be easy to get some people to do almost anything. So he's the one who's introducing all these ideas. And then, he says, I have a guy who can provide the explosives. And a couple of them wanted to get some things like batons and ballistic vests because May Day was coming up and they were afraid of being attacked by the cops. But it's clear that they saw these as defensive measures. So he introduces them to this arms dealer who, of course, is an undercover FBI agent. They don't want to buy the explosives. They keep badgering them. They don't have the money. This snitch gives them the money. The undercover FBI agent calls them up and is badgering them to buy the explosives. So it's really every step of the way. It's the FBI is making this plot possible. And so they were just recently sentenced, and the prosecution, 3 of them were recently sentenced. Douglas Wright, the prosecution was asking 30 years. Brandon Baxter, 25 years. They're being held up as the ringleader. And then Conor Stevens, 19 years. He was kind of just roped in at the last minute. And it's, this, when you're 20 years old and you're looking at 20, 30 years in the can, I mean, it's just destroying your lives. And I've been in close touch with Conor Stevens' family, and it's just it's unbelievable what this has done to his family. Just the way this has devastated their lives. His mother said to me just a few days ago, you can't imagine, how this has affected me. I wake up thinking about Conor. All day long I think about Conor. I go to bed thinking about Conor. When I hear people say I've had a bad day, you don't know what it means to have a bad day. And we can multiply this hundreds of times, right? This is the same strategy that the FBI has been using against Muslim Americans since after September 11th. And it's over 400 cases. And in nearly all these cases, they're informants, they're snitches, and usually these are criminals who are trying to get leniency for some charges, and they're on the FBI payroll. This is very similar to a case working its way through courts, now known as the Newburgh 4, where the informant in that case took 18 months to badger and control these desperate poor men, one of whom his lawyer said is borderline mentally retarded, into engaging in this plot to buy Stinger missiles, to shoot down airplanes, and to bomb synagogues. But it was basically, if you go through the FBI tapes, he's constantly badgering them and harassing them. The guy who's the alleged ringleader, James Cromartie, is at times he's trying to get away from him. He's not answering calls. He's telling him he's out of state, and he only goes back to him when he loses his job at Walmart. And this guy is telling him he'll give him $250,000. He'll set him up with a barber shop. He'll give him luxury cars. It's just the government. It's really disgusting that this is what the money goes towards. And the FBI has an $8 billion counterterrorism budget. That's the size of Taiwan's entire military budget. And this is what it does, because then they will come out and wave, these indictments and say, we caught these dangerous terrorists. We're keeping America safe. Now give us more money.
Perhaps another item for the coming Fiscal Cliff budget cuts.
One can only hope.
All right. Well, with that, we are unfortunately out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us again this morning.
Great to be with you all.